Thanks to everyone who's joined so far. We'll wait just one more minute and then get started. All right. Hi, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have some more join as we get going in these first few minutes, but welcome to VCCA's General Assembly Legislative Preview webinar. I'm John Bagwell. I'm the Executive Director of VCCA, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Bob Kitchen join us today to give the presentation. Dr. Kitchen is a retired family physician living in Fairfax and has been VCCA's advocacy chair for the last several years. And in that role, tracks legislation, organizes the advocacy committee that we work with, made up of volunteer members, organizes meetings with legislators both in and out of session, and helps guide kind of our legislative priorities in terms of organizational sign-on letters and other General Assembly advocacy opportunities. So thank you everyone for joining. I want to say first off, we've got our Advocacy Day, our annual Advocacy Day coming up next Wednesday and Thursday. If you are not able to attend that, this webinar will still have valuable information for you about the legislation that you can weigh in on through other opportunities besides our Advocacy Day. So welcome to everybody, whether you are planning to be in Richmond with us next week or not. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob for us to get started. We'll have Bob's presentation will last around 30 minutes, and then we will have some time for Q&A. If you have questions that come to mind throughout the presentation, everyone is in listen-only mode, but there should be a Q&A box in your Zoom menu from whatever platform you're joining from. And you are free to put questions throughout the presentation into that feature, and we will collect them and make sure that we answer them all at the end. But if some questions come in that are right on topic for something that is being discussed, we might be able to get to them in real time as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob.
Well, John, thank you very much. And I also want to welcome everybody to this year's presentation in preparation for our visit to the General Assembly. And get my slides all set here. And just want to start off and say that I do not have any financial conflicts to disclose. So we'll go ahead and get started here. And as John said, we'll be meeting next week, Wednesday evening, if you're able to come down for that evening, and then on Thursday in the morning, we'll go visit our legislators. So the objectives today are to talk about VCCA's advocacy role, our past advocacy days, the General Assembly and the legislative process, past and present legislation, that which we want to defend and that which we are promoting, and then the details for Advocacy Day. And for VCCA, three pillars of our work include education and research, community outreach, and advocacy. And our statement regarding advocacy is that climate policy is health policy. VCCA clinicians provide credible health-based perspectives on climate policy solutions to ensure that policies are made with the health of our citizens and communities as a top priority. So this is the underpinnings of our visit to the legislator. And health professionals in general have somewhat of an obligation to convey messages because we are so highly held in the opinion of the public. And this is a Gallup survey. This is from 2018, and they asked people to rate different fields in terms of honesty and ethical standards. And you can see that the top three positions here are held by health professionals, nurses, physicians, and pharmacists. And this has continued in subsequent years. The most recent surveys show similar positions for these. I think school teachers are in a tie or just ahead for pharmacists. Those are line graphs as opposed to a bar graph. So I continue to show this one because it best demonstrates the position of health professionals. So our annual advocacy days started back in 2018. And at that time, we had members who went to the General Assembly and basically met with our legislators and did general education about climate change and its impact on health. But this was the first time that physicians in white coats walked the halls of the General Assembly to discuss climate change solutions. In 2019, we then identified legislation that we thought was important to be passed, and that included bills dealing with coal ash storage, expanding access to solar power, and joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. In 2020, we again supported joining RGGI. We talked about the health benefits of the Virginia Clean Economy Act, also wanted to protect workers from extreme heat and increase access to solar generation. Now, in 2021, we went virtual because of the pandemic, but we had still continued to have meeting with our legislators and their aides. And this time we supported the advanced clean car standards, electrification of the school bus fleet, environmental justice, and improved air quality monitoring. And then last year, due to a change in the political balance in the General Assembly, we went on the defense of the bills which had been previously passed, including those for joining RGGI, the Clean Economy Act, and clean car standards. So this year, this will be the 6th annual Advocacy Day occurring at, our visits will be on the 9th of February, a Thursday. I'll just go through a bit of an explanation of the General Assembly and the legislative process. So there's a regular session, which is what we will be visiting. They can also call special sessions. The regular session starts on the second Wednesday of January, so it's January 11th this year. In even years, it goes for 60 days, and odd years, this year, goes for 45 days. But really, it starts off as 30 days, but just about always the legislators vote to extend it the additional 15 days. There are so many bills that it would probably be impossible to get all their business taken care of in just 30 days. And we'll look at the calendar, but you'll see it's, filing deadline and crossover are very important dates. And so pre-filing of bills actually starts in July. So in July of last year, legislators were starting to consider bills that they may want to present to this year's General Assembly. So it means right now, 6 months from now, we can start looking at bills that we may want to ask them to support. So the General Assembly started on the 11th. Crossover occurs on the 7th of February, about that day, which is actually a day before we are down in Richmond. Crossover is important in that the bills passed in each chamber of the General Assembly are then sent to the other chamber, and the whole process of considering those bills occurs again, meaning going to committees, and committees make decisions on voting. And then once a bill has passed both chambers, then it is considered a complete bill, and adjournment occurs on the 25th of February. So that's their deadline. At that time, the bills that were passed, agreed to by both chambers, are sent to the governor. And the governor then is able to review those bills, either sign them or create amendments or veto the bill. So on the 12th of April, the General Assembly reconvenes to consider these bills that didn't get off the governor's desk, to see what they are going to do in terms of trying to advance those bills or not. Then a bill that actually approved becomes effective on July 1st. So the makeup of the chambers right now, the House has 100 members, and the balance currently is 52 Republicans and 48 Democrats. The Senate has 40 members, and this slide's just a little bit out of date. It had been 21 Dems, 19 Republicans, but a few weeks ago, there was a special election because one of our state senators, Senator Keegan's, won an election to a congressional seat, the U.S. Congress. So when they had the special election for her seat, she was a Republican, a Democrat won that seat. So the balance is now 22 Dems and 18 Republicans. So what is the legislative process? How's a bill started? What occurs to finally get it to be enacted legislation? Well, the General Assembly member, being in the House, being one of the delegates or the senator, has an idea on his or her own, or gets an idea from a lobbyist or an advocacy group, maybe kind of like VCCA. And once they've gotten the idea of what topic or subject area or how they want the bill to sound, they actually send it to the Department of Legislative Services, who writes the actual language for the bill. And at that time, this member who formulated the bill is identified as the chief patron. So in some legislators, they probably talk about sponsors, and that's what I think we usually think of the term of the legislator who's responsible for the bill. But in Virginia General Assembly, they are chief patrons or co-patrons. The bill then is sent to committee. And in the House, the Speaker of the House, one of the delegates, determines which committees the bills go to. And the Speaker is the person, is from the party in the majority. In the Senate, there's a clerk who determines what committees they go to. The committees will then hold public hearings. You can actually testify in person and virtually, usually a limited amount of time for a member of the public to testify. And then the committee makes a decision on whether that bill will advance further to be voted on by that chamber or not. And I'll show you some of the decision phrases that occur when the committees take a stand. And then when the bill does pass that particular chamber, like the House, and then at crossover, it's sent to the opposite chamber for this process to start over again. Then finally, bills that have been approved go to the governor after the session adjourns, and the governor can have a line item veto or fully veto, put in amendments and things like that. Then it goes back to that additional session the legislators come back to in April. So when are there opportunities to contribute to the bill? Advocacy opportunities. Well, you can be the group or the person who gives the idea to the lawmaker and actually can get involved in the writing of the bill. There are organizations that we have worked with a couple of years ago when we were working for worker heat protections. One of the groups that we worked with actually wrote the language for the bill and then presented that to the delegate who was going to be sponsoring it or being the patron. And then the next opportunity is when the bill goes to the committee, and there you can speak either in person or virtually. So what are the actions that committees take? And I've got them in green and red. So if you like the bill, you're in favor of the bill, green is good, red is bad. So the committee can say they recommend reporting, which means it's going to be sent to that floor, that chamber, subsequently for a vote of all the members. It can be reported from the committee. Read a third time and passed is what you'll see when the bill actually passes the House or the Senate, and then or recommends reporting with amendments. So the committees may decide they want to make some changes to it. And that's where this comes from. Now, these other phrases, sometimes hard to understand what they mean, but basically to lay on the table means that bill is done this session, or failed to recommend reporting, or tabled, or passed by indefinitely. If that happens to any of the bills, it's done for this General Assembly. Now, this is a very helpful tool to have if you're following any legislation in the General Assembly. And I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that. There we go. So if you wanted to find this legislative information system, you would then put into your browser lis.virginia.gov. And this is the page that you'll be signed into. There we go. So you can look up a bill by its particular number. You can look it up by the member. You can look up committees, etc. So I'm just going to demonstrate one of the bills that we're supporting. And we'll go in by the number, and it's going to be Senate Bill 1322. So then it'll tell you the title of the bill, who the patrons are, Senator McClellan and Hashmi, a summary of the bill. This one's called Comprehensive Plan Health Community Strategy, describes it. If you actually want to see the text of the bill, you can click on where the PDFs are. And then the last part, the history, will describe the path of that bill. So in this case, the clerk of the Senate referred it to the Committee on Local Government, and that committee reported it from local government, meaning it's going to go to the floor of the Senate for a vote. And we'll even tell you what the vote was in terms of this decision. And when you click on that, it will tell you which senators voted in favor and which were opposed. And so then the final action was that in the Senate, the bill was passed by the Senate by a vote of 25-15. Now, this means this bill then will go to the House when crossover occurs. And the next thing I want to demonstrate is if you actually know your delegate or senator, but you're not sure about their legislation, like I wanted to look at my delegate, Kathy Tran, you can then go to her site or her link, go into that, find the bills that she's been the co-patron for. I'm sorry, the patron for. And one of the ones we'll be hearing more about later is this one called High Polycyclic Aromatic Hydrocarbons, prohibits payment sealants that contain this substance. And you can see the same type of information about the bill like we saw for the Senate bill. And it tells you where it is right now. And it's been assigned to the Agriculture, Chesapeake Natural Resources Subcommittee. And then later, when there is activity, this thing will be continued. Okay, so the advocacy process in general, when you're meeting with your legislators, is some do's and don'ts. Explain why you care. You know, why is this important to you? Use your constituent credentials. I think we've all found, or if you haven't yet, you'll know that if you are a constituent of that particular senator or delegate, you're going to have their ear versus somebody who doesn't actually vote for them. So when you've made your appointments, it's good that you've identified that you're a constituent so that they are more likely to arrange a time for you. It's good to bring information about the message you want to convey. Also, this can be sent in advance of the appointment with the legislator or their aide by sending them by email. Telling personal stories really helps, especially when we're dealing with health issues. You don't have to name a particular patient or an individual, but if you had somebody from their district and you provided a medical service to them due to something, some negative effect of climate change, that'd be very powerful. So providing that can help to really convey your message. And then at the end, don't be afraid to try to pin them down and say, well, are you going to support this legislation? I think it's very important. And we would like you to really consider that. Now, the don'ts, don't think of them as celebrities. Don't be in awe. They were elected. They depend on your vote. They really do want to take positions that their constituents are going to favor. Don't get into a debate. No point and counterpoint. Just present your position, listen to what they have to say. And then also it's important just to bring up facts and studies, not a lot of personal opinions. So into the specific legislation, I mentioned that last year we were on the defensive, trying to protect the previously passed Virginia Clean Economy Act. Also, Virginia's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and clean car standards. And again, this year, we will be asking that our legislators protect these pieces of legislation because we think they're very important. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about each of these pieces of legislation in terms of what the benefit has been. And the Clean Economy Act was passed in 2020 by the General Assembly. And it's a mechanism for transitioning Virginia's electric grid to 100% clean energy by 2045. Coal and oil-fired electric generating plants are going to be closed by 2024, just next year when you think about it. Biomass-fired plants to close by the end of 2028. And a recent analysis we saw said that the Clean Economy Act will create more than 13,000 jobs in the Commonwealth. This was an analysis done by the Virginia Climate Center at George Mason University about the Clean Economy Act. I'll just go ahead and read this. Assuming a steady rate of declining air pollution between the time the law was enacted, such that the goal of 100% reduction is reached in 2045, by that year, the Commonwealth will prevent up to 640 premature deaths, save upwards of $356 million per year in health costs, for a total savings of up to $7 billion over the next 20 years, prevent thousands of lost workdays, saving Virginia citizens and businesses $387,000 annually, or $7.8 million by 2045. And it said the greatest health costs will occur in the counties of Chesterfield, Henrico, and Fairfax. And it shows the respective amount of healthcare savings. The next piece of legislation that we would like to see continue is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And this is a map showing the New England and Mid-Atlantic states that have joined RGGI. And so RGGI is a market-based effort among the 12 New England and Mid-Atlantic states to cap and reduce carbon dioxide emissions for the power sector. Fossil fuel-fired electric power generators required to hold allowances equal to their CO2 emissions over a 3-year control period. And these companies that have these fossil fuel fired power generators can buy a CO2 allowance by any participating state. And that is revenue that the state then acquires. And the benefits to the RGGI states shows that emissions from power plants have dropped by 50%, double the amount that emissions have dropped in non-RGGI states. Electricity rates have declined compared to increases for other states. And in the 5 years of 2009 to 2014, the decrease in pollution in RGGI states led to the prevention of these various medical conditions, such as 540 premature adult deaths, greater than 200 asthma ER visits, 112 preterm births, and the avoided cost of health impacts on children are estimated as upwards of $350 million. The benefits to Virginia RGGI is that this reduction program is driving down greenhouse gas emissions and improving air quality. In just under 2 years, Virginia's participation in RGGI has generated over $500 million in revenue that's being used to create more energy efficient and affordable housing units, help low-income families reduce energy bills, and enhance community flood prevention and protection efforts. And in the first year alone, RGGI helped slash energy sector air pollution by 14% in Virginia. Also, in-state pollutants such as sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxide dropped by 13% and 19% respectively between 2020 and 2021. And the breakdown of the funds for RGGI are such that the $524 million, $203 million has gone to community flood preparedness and $226 million for low-income energy efficiency programs. And checking my numbers there, but that's pretty representative there. And it says by continuing in RGGI, Virginia will be able to drive down overall emissions by an additional 30% from 2020 to 2030. So this is a very powerful piece of legislation, which is going to help us reach our clean energy goals and protect the health of Virginians. Then advanced clean car standards. This is the third piece of legislation, previously passed legislation, that we're going to ask our legislators to continue protecting. And it's important in Virginia because transportation is responsible for 48% of CO2 emissions. And a little over 2 years ago, VCCA commissioned an assessment of one of these pollutants, particulate matter 2.5, and its impact on the health of Virginians. And we found that Virginia-specific transportation generated PM 2.5 was responsible for 92 premature deaths, 71 non-fatal heart attacks. You can see the other numbers. And the cost of these medical conditions was valued at $750 million annually. And this shows that if you drive an electric vehicle, it's 67% cleaner in terms of CO2 emissions than the average passenger ICE or internal combustion engine car. And this includes the pollution coming from fossil fuel electricity production. So this is only going to improve as the amount of fossil fuel produced energy in the Commonwealth continues to decrease. And the clean car standards are really due to, in 1970, the Clean Air Act was created, which set standards for emission controls. But at that time, California had stricter emission controls than what the Clean Air Act was requesting or designating. And so it created a waiver for California and created section 177 that said that any state that wanted to adopt the stricter California standards could do so without having to go to the EPA and asking for a waiver. And 17 states in the District of Columbia have exercised section 177. This map shows where these states are located. And one state, I think that's Arizona, dropped out after joining. So this was passed in 2021 by the Virginia General Assembly, and it takes effect for model year 2025. So that'll be in the fall of next year. And the adoption of advanced clean car standards will put Virginia on a progressive pathway to achieve full transportation to 100% clean transportation. And auto manufacturers will be selling up to 8% of their inventory as zero emission vehicles. And also the other vehicles they sell will have more stringent emission standards. And it's been projected that advanced clean car standards will have the potential for a net job growth of 29,000 jobs by 2040, while avoiding 48 million tons of carbon emissions by the same year. So what are the challenges? And currently, John and I just received an email this morning, or one group who's been following this enumerated the various bills that are challenging these three past pieces of legislation. Right now, there are 17 bills that have been presented to the General Assembly that are challenging the Clean Economy Act, either removing aspects of it or wanting to overturn it altogether. And this is just two of those. There are both a Senate bill and a companion bill in the House that wants to identify coal mine methane as a renewable energy source. Its current status is that it's in a Senate Commerce and Labor Subcommittee, but the House of Delegates, the Commerce and Energy Committee, actually reported it to the floor. So it's going to be voted on there. And as we saw, the distribution in the floor is 52 Republicans versus 48 Democrats. So I expect this will be passed and then sent to the Senate at crossover. Another group of bills, both the Senate bill and the House bill, talks about changing the requirements of the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, and it says utilities can petition for relief from fossil fuel generator requirements. So where the Clean Economy Act said that certain coal plants had to be shut down by 2024, utilities can say, we'd like to get a waiver. We don't think we can meet that. Also, it says they have to give annual reports of the impact on grid reliability. So this is allowing the utilities to create an excuse that can be recognized by the government and Virginia to say, hey, they can't make it's going to limit the electricity we can present to our citizens. For RGGI, there was a single bill, and this was the Clean Energy and Community Flood Preparedness Act repeal. And basically it said that the director of the Department of Environmental Quality would take all steps necessary to suspend the Commonwealth's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Well, this is only presented in the Senate, and you can see that the committee in the Senate, Ag, Conservation, and Natural Resources, voted it down and passed it by indefinitely by an 8-6 margin. So currently, there's no legislation that we're aware of that is trying to overturn RGGI. However, the administration started on the first day that Governor Youngkin took office to say that it was going to remove Virginia from RGGI. So the Air Pollution Control Board, whose membership was changed at the governor's direction to be supportive of getting out of RGGI, voted to repeal the regulation passed by the General Assembly to remove Virginia from RGGI in 2023 when our 3-year contract is up. These are just different steps which will occur for this in terms of how this would go through the process of actually being adopted. But right now, there seems to be a difference of opinions in terms of whether the Air Pollution Control Board or the governor has this power, and litigation is anticipated. And this was interesting in that there was a committee in the House that actually had a hearing about RGGI and the administration's planned activity. And before the deputy director spoke, Andrew Wheeler, and that name probably rings a bell for some people, who had a special position created for him by the governor, spoke to say that the director would be limited in the questions he could answer because they anticipated litigation to be occurring. So the administration understands that they're on a little bit of thin ice in terms of trying to overturn this. Then advanced clean car standards. There were a total of 7 bills that were presented, and 5 of them were in the Senate, and they were pretty direct. It said that it wanted to repeal the Air Board Control's authority to implement low emissions and zero emission vehicle standards for vehicles 25 and later, basically what clean car standards had stated would happen. Also prohibit the board from adopting or enforcing any model year standards related to control of emissions from new vehicles, and also prohibit the Commonwealth from requiring any new motor vehicle as being compliant with anything regarding the control of emissions adopted by California. Fortunately, the Senate was not in favor of this, banded these bills together, and the same committee, Agriculture, Conservation, Natural Resources, voted 8-7 to pass by indefinitely. So this was killed in the Senate. However, the bill basically of the same wording did pass the House Bill 1378, and is now going to go to the Senate in crossover. But it's already been assigned to the same committee, so we expect that it won't make it to the floor in the Senate. And I guess I couldn't resist, but this morning, Virginia Mercury, which is an online newspaper, had this political cartoon here about the Virginia General Assembly passing to repeal the Clean Cars Bill. So I'm not going to identify each piece of these legislation, and we'll talk about them individually, but we have a top 3 that are going to be our primary pieces of legislation that we will support when we meet with our legislators. The next 2 are on deck because since we are still in the process of the bills being considered in the different chambers, if a particular piece of legislation in the top 3 doesn't make it to crossover, we'll have backup bills. So we'll start off and say The first one is both a Senate bill and a House bill, and it talks about providing public school systems with information should they want to build new schools or renovate schools and incorporate renewable energy generation facilities in that construction. So this is identifying this commission with the Constellation Department of Energy to create resources for the schools to know how to do this. And so this has been in the Senate reported from the Rules Committee, so it'll be voted on in the Senate. The House subcommittee recommended laying it on the table, so the House version of this has been killed. Next is a single bill in the Senate from Senator Hashmi, and this directs the Department of Emergency Management to develop a comprehensive extreme heat emergency response plan. And this would include such things as a heat adaptation plan for the state, a coordination team to help coordinate across state agencies, public cooling spaces, warning systems, housing cooling needs, various things to deal with heat emergency. This has passed the Senate. We will see how it does when it goes to the House and crossover. Then a comprehensive plan, healthy community strategies by Senator McClellan and Delegate Simons. And this authorized certain size cities and counties to consider adopting a healthy community strategy. And it says that this bill provides a locality strategy when they develop their annual community strategies, can identify neighborhoods with major sources of pollution or hazardous waste, come up with objectives and policies to reduce those health risks, promote civic engagement so the residents have a voice in how this is dealt with, and prioritize improvements in programs. This has passed the Senate, but in the House, the subcommittee killed it by recommending laying it on the table. Then our two backup bills. One is to permit a locality to prohibit the sale and distribution of pavement sealants that contain polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon. And these have been identified as having several carcinogens and are designated as hazardous substance. And so right now, there doesn't seem to be legislation that would allow a locality to say, you cannot use this. But if this is passed, the violation of this regulation would lead to a civil penalty of $250 to be paid into the Virginia Environmental Emergency Response Fund. And it's currently in this committee. And then the last of our bills, another one for on deck, is the perinatal health, which tells the Virginia Department of Health to evaluate strategies to reduce maternal and infant mortality rates. Our interest, VCCA's interest in this, is that early in the legislative process, we actually contacted several legislators to ask them to consider creating legislation that would protect pregnant women and infants from extreme heat. We didn't have any of the legislators move forward with that, but this bill potentially could provide information on strategies against extreme heat when it talks about things to reduce maternal infant mortality rates. So it may be one that we will ask for support for. Okay, so now I'll get down just to the details of Advocacy Day. And so our first activity starts next Wednesday on February 8th. And this will be at the hotel in the Hilton Hotel in Richmond on 501 East Broad Street. And from 6 to 7:30, it'll be a cocktail social hour with networking opportunities. People from organizations that VCCA works with relative to climate change and health, such as VCN and the Southern Environmental Law Center, et cetera, will be invited, and there'll be a chance to talk with them. Then from 7:30 to 9, there will be dinner, and we'll have presentations from some guests. And then the next morning, Thursday morning, before we go to the General Assembly, we'll have breakfast with advocacy training from 7:30 to 9. And then meetings with your legislators will occur from 9 o'clock to 11:30 at the Pocahontas Building. And I've got a map to show you that. And then from 12 to about 1:30, We'll have a lunch debrief session, speaker, and a special awards presentation. And this map shows that the Hilton is right here, where Google Maps shows the condominiums, and it's just a 9-minute walk to the Pocahontas building here on Main Street. So if you want to get in touch with either John or myself, these are our emails. And if you're interested in looking over the legislative information system further, this would be the link in terms of how you could get to it. So thank you, and happy to take any questions. John, I'll stop my sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. That was extremely interesting and useful, I think, for everybody here. We've got a lot of questions that came in. We will try to get through as many of them as possible, but any that we do not get to in the time allowed, please feel free to reach back out, and we'll make sure that all of your questions are answered prior to Advocacy Day. The first one, a question that came in just from Joel, just so that everyone knows this recording, we're happy to send out slides. I hope that's okay, Bob. Yes. To anybody that requests them. We're also going to make a recording of this webinar available to everyone if you want to rewatch it, or if you have classmates or colleagues who might be coming to Advocacy Day who could not attend live today. We will be sharing this recording, so it will be available for everyone. Let's see. In terms of scheduling meetings, Leon, the question about unresponsive legislators. There will be some legislators who simply, might be going through a staff transition, or simply are too overwhelmed and do not get back in a timely way. It's for anyone who we do not get a confirmed meeting for, anyone is free to walk the halls of the General Assembly offices and drop off information, or to touch base. So in some cases, legislators said that they did not have any time, or they were in they're going to be in a committee meeting the morning that we'll be visiting the General Assembly. In those cases, we might just drop by their offices and hope to catch a 5-minute conversation with a staffer or the member if they happen to be there. But the bottom line is that, yes, you should continue to follow up. I would send at least 2 emails and then follow that up with a phone call before we can just figure out that they're not going to respond and confirm a time with us. Us as VCCA staff will also be calling some of the offices that have been harder to reach to see if we can make an extra point of contact and get a meeting time confirmed. So please do continue your own efforts. We're going to continue ours as well, but do rest assured that even if you don't have an assigned meeting time with your legislator as a constituent, we will make sure that you are put in another group to attend a different meeting, or at least get to drop by their office and leave some information about the bills that we are supporting. Next, Leon and Bob, feel free to jump in here, but the fact that this year is an election year where all state senators and House members are up for re-election in Virginia. Elections are never far from legislators' minds. So it is never a bad idea to make them know that you are also aware of their election timelines and election seasons. One thing we do need to be very careful about, as a nonprofit organization, we are not allowed to endorse any candidates for elections. So would never want to give the impression that if someone supports the legislation that we are urging them to in the General Assembly session, that they would have our organizational support when it comes time for election season. But short of that, really anything goes, and legislators are more likely to listen to you if you talk about your passports of votes or donations on their behalf. And they will definitely pay more attention if that is, if you make them aware that you are aware of their upcoming election. Anything to add on that, Bob?
Not much. I mean, I don't want to get kind of negative, but there was, when the Washington Post reviewed what's happening in the General Assembly, they identified that this being an election year, it's not likely that major legislation is going to get passed, that most of the legislators are going to want to, I don't want to call it grandstand, but make, high energy speeches on the floor and then just get ready for the election. So in the bills that we are supporting, I think we have to understand the reality of the political balance in the chamber and the likelihood that there won't be much in the way of bipartisanship. So, like I said, I don't want to put any shade on this, but it's a bit of the reality of what we're dealing with.
Absolutely. As for Leon's next question about the makeup of the House and Senate, actually the House of Delegates is currently a majority of Republicans. So they set the agenda, they determine committee breakdown and makeup, and they ensure that that every committee has a majority of Republicans on it, and vice versa on the Democratic side when it comes to the Senate chamber. So that leads, as Bob said, to a lot of partisan gridlock with sometimes bills failing on merit, sometimes bills failing or succeeding on political value. So, for instance, the Senate Democrats were very proud of the climate achievements. And even if some of the bills challenging those achievements contain some reasonable provisions, they do not want to politically look like they are giving the Republican governor a victory or the Republican House a victory by passing their bills, and vice versa. So again, this is a period of partisan gridlock with the current makeup of the General Assembly and the political parties in charge. And we saw a lot more movement, of course, in previous years when that was not the case, but that's the reality that we face this year. The next question from Cindy is about RGGI being a tax. This goes to my last point, that there likely are changes that Senate Democrats who previously passed Virginia's participation in RGGI might like to see in that bill in terms of how it is implemented and how Dominion is able to charge their consumers for some of the carbon credits that they are purchasing for being a part of RGGI. However, opening up any part of that law opens all of it up for budget amendments that can be added by the governor later in the process, and therefore there is a hesitancy to make even minor technical amendments on a passed law because of the political maneuvering that could take place as it's being finalized, that could lead to a full repeal or unintended consequences from lawmakers that support amending current laws on the books. In our view, much should be done to reform the way that Dominion structures and charges its payments and is beholden to stockholders in Virginia. Virginia does not have a proper amount of regulatory oversight, and the State Corporation Commission, or SCC, which oversees a lot of the Dominion rate-paying laws, has not been friendly to our issues in recent years in many cases. So we really do not see RGGI as a default tax. The way that Dominion has structured its implementation allows for this talking point, and it's something that gets very, very complex into laws that aren't even related to RGGI when it gets into certain categories. So in bringing this up, Cindy, it brings up a good larger point. Even those of us who spend time tracking legislation and monitoring advocacy opportunities and these laws do not understand all of the complexities. Very, very few people in the entire state do. So it is not something that you need to be fully knowledgeable about in order to be effective advocates for. So just know that if there are some aspects of these laws that we are discussing that are over your head or that you don't fully understand, in no way should that prevent you from being an effective advocate. I can guarantee you the lawmakers who will be voting on these bills do not understand 90% of them. They are going with the recommendations of their staff, their constituents, and expert groups that they have built relationships with, like us and like all of you. So building these relationships and building up that trust between yourself and a lawmaker can do a lot more than a technical and full understanding of every aspect of every bill that we're talking about here. Next, we'll go to Joan's question in terms of the 3 past bills. Joan, you may have asked this question before Bob got to that, all of the legislative threats that those top 3 climate priorities face in this legislative session, but it's nearly 24 bills that have been identified that would repeal or significantly weaken the Clean Economy Act, Virginia's participation in RGGI, or the Clean Cars bill. We are actively, and our partners that we work with are actively monitoring the status of all of those bills. And I assure everybody that it will be participating in Advocacy Day that you will get a sheet of paper on the morning before your meetings that have all of the latest information on which bills are still in play that we need to be either supporting or encouraging votes against. And so that will be changing on our end up until the last minute, depending on what actions are taken between now and then. And many of those bills will be taken up by committees and either approved or defeated in committees prior to our Advocacy Day next week. And then, let's see. Bob, would you like to take this one about the electric cars? From the anonymous. Oh, Bob, you're on mute. Bob.
Okay, sorry for being on mute. Okay, several pounds of cobalt per car, the mining, which is a focus of intense controversy to its in century, at least under just supporting emissions. Well, that actually is a very significant consideration in terms of the minerals that go into these vehicles. I guess there's no perfect solution to any particular problem. And I think that the industry is going to try the best it can to try to find more acceptable ways to get its materials. But in the big picture of things, if you truly believe that we have a significant danger from climate change and increasing CO2, we need to take every step we can to try to reverse that, so this planet's still habitable for the kids of my grandkids. And we've done some very important activity recently with the Inflation Reduction Act, But even with that's providing us, unless everything clicks perfectly, it's not going to really help us that much in the long run. There's so many more things that need to be done. So I don't know if this is what is meant by an existential question, but I think we're getting into that realm. So, yeah, one of the things that was talked about was the bill that Manchin had in terms of infrastructure permitting and the importance of that being accelerated. A lot of people in the environmental community referred to it as Manchin's dirty deal because he included continuing, I think, the Mountain Valley Pipeline. And I looked at it, and after hearing information, I think there's a study out of Princeton or somewhere, that if the current infrastructure relative to electricity transmission is not significantly expanded, that only 20% of the benefits of the IRA will be realized. And in my thinking, if we don't take some steps to accelerate infrastructure and electric transmission, we are going to be so far behind. And personally, I guess I was willing to accept Mountain Valley Pipeline because of the bigger picture. So this is quite an answer. Yes, this is a very significant problem, a concern, a humanitarian issue in terms of the people who are mining these materials. But that to say, well, we shouldn't have any electric vehicles, we should not use them for our transportation because of this, I think is not helping us really deal with this emergency.
Yeah,
so that's a pretty deep question.
a great point, Bob. And yes, a very complex issue. This was raised because one of the bills that is seeking to repeal the clean car standards that Virginia passed mentioned this slave labor being used in the mining process. In a former life, I worked on this international humanitarian issues, and those same minerals end up in every major appliance, every internal combustion engine, in every cell phone that we use. And so it's a much larger, the international human rights and mining issues certainly are deserving of attention and reform. However, this seems misplaced to tie it to the clean cars provision of Virginia, and very opportunistic. And so I think that we feel fine about resisting that bill because of how it misties the two issues together, in our opinion. We are drawing to a close. I know that we have several more questions. I just will close out trying to recap a couple of them. And then Bob, if you have any final points you want to make, we'll end here in just 2 or 3 minutes. But yes, Sam helpfully pointed out that VCCA was behind the bill that we are supporting with Senator Hashmi to develop a comprehensive emergency heat plan for the state. That was an issue that we found through research. New York State had passed a similar law in the past, and we used that as a model to bring that to the attention of a legislator that we knew to be an ally, and Senator Hashmi. And her office took on that issue and worked with legislative services to draft the bill and introduce it, and we have been supporting it throughout the process. So it does go to show how easy some of these ideas can be generated by constituents or groups like ours that have membership interests and expertise to actually see to bring this to the attention of a legislator and potentially see it become a law long term. It passed the Senate, I believe, by 25 votes, so it got bipartisan support, and we're very pleased to see that. We also, in terms of Danny's question about what extent to get, how deep into a back and forth to get with those that may not support our bills. I think that in these very limited advocacy meeting opportunities, many of these meetings will not last longer than 10 to 15 minutes. You'd be very lucky to get somewhere from 20 to 30 minutes with a legislator or their staff in this setting in session. The longer conversations with legislators have to happen outside of session. And many of them are very open and amenable to meeting out for coffee or for lunch when they are not in their General Assembly session to have deeper, more in-depth and nuanced conversations. But for the purposes of Advocacy Day, we simply won't have time to get into extended back and forths. So we will do some additional training and have the handouts that help you be brief, to the point. And our primary goal is not just to get support or to confirm, opposition on bills, but this is really about developing a longer term relationship that you can follow up with. So whatever questions you don't get a chance to ask, or whatever confirmations you don't get a chance to get a response to in this very brief meeting setting next week, that gives you an opportunity to follow up a week later with an email to continue to track the bills and hold them accountable for the way that they vote on those bills that we advocated for. Those are the types of communications that are going to really elevate your status as a constituent that the legislator listens to and follows. So I will end there. Bob provided our email addresses. Everyone should have my email address, john@virginiaclinicians.org. We want to end this on time, but we are happy to answer any follow-up questions you have in advance of our Advocacy Day next week. And Bob, I'll give you the last word before we close it out.
I'll just glad everybody was able to call in today or Zoom in, and look forward to seeing you in Richmond. Very significant activity on our part. John, I want to thank you for your moderating or emceeing today, and also providing some great feedback for the questions. So to say, we'll see you in Richmond.
All right. Thanks, everyone.